My face was swollen, burning, and painful, but her words hurt more. I looked at my son, waiting for him to stop her. He didn't. He chose his wife instead. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Maribel and I am 69 years old. I never imagined I would tell my story out loud like this. For most of my life I believed dignity meant staying quiet, especially as a mother. I thought love was proven by endurance, by swallowing discomfort and moving on. But there comes a moment when silence stops being strength and starts becoming surrender. That afternoon pushed me to that line, even though every instinct in me wanted to disappear. I have lived with allergies for many years. They don't announce themselves politely. They arrive suddenly without warning. Some days it's only a faint redness easy to hide. Other days, like that one, my face swells so badly that my skin feels tight and hot, stretched thin, as if it doesn't belong to me anymore. Doctors have always said stress makes it worse. I didn't need medical training to know that was true. Living on edge changes your body in ways no pill can fully undo. That morning I woke up already uncomfortable. By the time I finished my medication and applied my creams, my cheeks were flushed and my eyes were puffy. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, considering whether I should cancel my visit. But I pushed the thought aside. I didn't want to seem unreliable. I didn't want to give anyone a reason to think I wasn't needed. So I went anyway. I drove across town to my son's house, the same way I had done so many times before. Nothing about the drive felt unusual. Once there, I slipped into my routine. I helped with breakfast. I packed lunches. I wiped fingerprints off the table and stacked dishes in the sink. I did everything quietly, efficiently, the way I always had. Over time, I had learned that being useful was the safest way to exist in someone else's home. When my daughter-in-law finally walked into the kitchen, the atmosphere shifted. She stopped mid-step and stared at my face. Not with concern. Not with curiosity. With irritation. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice sharp. I explained gently. I told her it was an allergy flare, that it wasn't contagious, that I had it under control. I kept my voice calm, careful. I knew how quickly things could turn if I sounded defensive. She didn't listen. She stepped back as if I had moved toward her. "This isn't okay," she said. "You shouldn't be around the kids like this." Her words landed harder than I expected. I felt myself shrink, standing there in a house I had helped pay for, being spoken to like a problem that needed managing. I glanced toward the hallway, hoping my son would hear us. He did. He walked in just as she said, "You don't know what germs you're bringing in. This could make us all sick." I turned to him immediately. I remember holding his gaze, searching his face for something familiar. A memory. A reflex. Anything. I waited for him to say my name. I waited for him to defend me. Said he looked tired. Uncomfortable. And silent. After a long pause, he said, "Maybe it's better if you head home for now. Just until this clears up." That was it. No argument. No correction. No acknowledgement of how cruel her words had been. In that moment, something painful became very clear to me. He wasn't choosing peace. He was choosing her comfort over my dignity. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. My throat felt tight and my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I picked up my purse. No one followed me to the door. No one asked if I was okay to drive. The house felt suddenly unfamiliar, like I no longer belonged there. Outside, the cold air stung my skin, but it also grounded me. I sat in my car, staring straight ahead, my reflection faint in the windshield. An older woman. A swollen face. But still breathing. Still thinking. I didn't cry right away. What came first was something quieter. A realization settling slowly but firmly. I had been patient long enough. That day didn't break me. It woke me up. After I sat in my car for a while, I finally drove home, taking the long way without meaning to. I let the quiet follow me all the way back. When I stepped inside my house, it felt different. Too quiet, too honest. There was no one to impress, no one to please, no one to tiptoe around. Just me, my thoughts, and the truth I had been avoiding for years. I am Maribel. I'm 69 years old, a mother, and for most of my life I believed love meant endurance. I believed that if I stayed patient, if I stayed kind, if I stayed useful, I would always have a place in my family. I was raised to think that mothers don't complain. We adjust. We absorb. We forgive even when it costs us something. I raised my son alone after his father passed away suddenly when my boy was still young. There were no backups, no second incomes, no safety nets waiting beneath us. It was just the two of us. I worked long hours, saved every dollar I could, and made sure he never felt the weight of what we had lost. I didn't remarry. I didn't date. My focus stayed exactly where I thought it belonged, on him. As he grew older, I told myself every sacrifice was worth it. Watching him build a life, a family, a future, that was supposed to be my reward. When he married, I welcomed his wife with an open heart. I told myself blending families took time. That misunderstandings were normal. That respect would come naturally if I stayed patient. But respect didn't grow. It faded. My daughter-in-law was polite in public, careful with her tone when others were listening. But behind closed doors there was distance. Control. A constant reminder that I was a guest, not family. I noticed how decisions were made without me, how my opinions were quietly dismissed, how my presence was tolerated rather than truly wanted. So I stayed. I helped with the children. I covered expenses when things were tight. I stepped in without being asked and stepped back without being thanked. I never kept score. I never reminded them of what I had given. I didn't want gratitude. I wanted peace. Emotionally, I lived in a careful balance. I measured every word, every movement. I learned when to speak and when to fade into the background. I told myself this was maturity. I told myself this was strength. But inside I was exhausted. I was tired of feeling like my value depended on what I could provide. Tired of feeling invisible unless I was useful. Tired of watching my son slowly shift his loyalty elsewhere while I learned how to take up less space. What happened that day with my allergy didn't create the problem, but revealed it. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit something I had been pushing away for years. I was lonely inside my own family. And the hardest part wasn't my daughter-in-law's cruelty. It was my son's silence. Because silence, when it comes from someone you raised, cuts deeper than any insult ever could. That realization stayed with me long after the swelling on my face went down. And I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Before everything broke, my life followed a quiet, predictable rhythm. I lived alone in a small, tidy home not far from my son's neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I kept it clean, kept the lights low in the evenings, and let routine fill the silence. Mornings were slow and deliberate. I made tea, took my medication, checked my face in the mirror, and reminded myself to stay calm. Stress always made my allergies worse, so I learned to move through the day gently, carefully, as if my own body required patience. Most days I drove to my son's house. I never showed up unannounced. I always texted first, always waited for permission. I helped with the children, cooked meals, folded laundry, and ran small errands without being asked. I told myself I was lucky to still be included. I told myself this was what being a good mother looked like at my age. Supportive, quiet, grateful for whatever time I was given. But there were signs I chose not to see. At the dinner table, conversations shifted when I spoke. My suggestions were met with polite smiles and quick changes of subject. If I stayed too long, I could feel it in the air. Tight expressions, restless movements, eyes drifting toward the clock. If I left early, no one noticed. I learned how to exist in that space, neither wanted nor openly rejected, always careful not to take up too much room. My allergies had become a source of tension long before that day. When my skin flared, my daughter-in-law would open windows, wipe down surfaces, remind the children to wash their hands. She never asked how I felt. She treated my condition like an inconvenience, something that disrupted her order, her control. I tried to manage it quietly. I carried creams and medication in my bag. I excused myself to the bathroom when my face began to itch or burn. I didn't want to be seen as difficult. There were moments that stayed with me, small, sharp moments that didn't leave bruises but still hurt. A comment about cleanliness. A suggestion that I should sit a little farther from the children. A joke made in front of friends that forced a smile onto my face while something inside me hollowed out. Each time I told myself not to overreact. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself this was just how families adjusted. My son noticed. I know he did. But he never stepped in. He stayed neutral, or at least that's what he called it. I see now that neutrality has a cost, and I was the one paying it. Quietly, repeatedly, without complaint. Despite everything, I kept showing up. I believed consistency would earn respect. I believed love was proven through patience. I believed that one day my place in their family would feel secure instead of conditional. Instead, I was slowly being pushed to the edges. By the time my allergy flared that morning, the groundwork had already been laid. The distance, the discomfort, the unspoken belief that my presence was optional, easily removed if it became inconvenient. I just didn't know yet how far they were willing to go to make that clear. The betrayal didn't arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. There was no explosion, no dramatic scene anyone could point to later. It came wrapped in calm words and measured tones, so reasonable on the surface that it almost sounded logical. Somehow that made it worse. That afternoon my allergy was at its peak. My cheeks were swollen, my skin tight and red, my eyes burning as if I hadn't slept in days. I tried to make myself smaller. I moved quietly around the kitchen, washed my hands more than usual, wiped down surfaces before anyone asked. I stayed out of the way on purpose. Even then I could feel her watching me. Finally my daughter-in-law spoke. "I don't think this is healthy," she said, folding her arms. "You shouldn't be around the kids like this." I froze, still holding a dish towel in my hands. For a moment I just stood there. Then I asked what she meant, even though I already knew. She gestured toward my face. "We don't know what it is. It could be something infectious." I explained again, calmly and carefully. I told her it was an allergy. I reminded her that I had seen doctors, that this wasn't new, that it wasn't contagious. I even offered to step into another room if it made her more comfortable. My voice stayed soft, almost apologetic, even though I had done nothing wrong. She shook her head. "You're not listening. This is about our family's safety." The word safety cut into me. As if I were a danger. As if my body itself had become a threat. Then my son walked in. I turned to him instinctively. I didn't need him to argue. I didn't need him to raise his voice or take sides dramatically. I just needed him to say one thing. That I wasn't a problem. That I mattered. She spoke before I could. "I don't want the kids exposed to whatever this is. We can't take that risk." There was a pause. A long, heavy pause that seemed to stretch longer than it should have. My son looked at me, then at her. I saw discomfort flicker across his face, but it never turned into courage. He rubbed his forehead and finally said, "Maybe Mom should head home for now. Just until it clears up." That sentence landed harder than anything she had said. I asked him quietly, "Do you really think I'm unsafe?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, it wasn't to defend me. It was to smooth things over. "Let's not make this a big deal." That was the moment. The exact moment I understood that my feelings mattered less than her comfort. That my years of sacrifice carried no weight against her irritation. That I could be humiliated in my own son's home, and he would call it practicality. She nodded, satisfied. I stood there, my face burning, my chest tight. I felt small in a way I hadn't felt since I was a young widow, trying to survive in a world that didn't care. I realized everyone in that room was waiting for me to accept the blame, to apologize for existing in a body that wasn't convenient for them. So I did what I had always done. I complied. I picked up my bag. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. No one offered to walk me out. No one asked if I was okay. The children didn't even look up from their screens. As I stepped outside, I heard the door close behind me. Not loudly, just firmly. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lights off, my purse still resting on the chair where I had dropped it hours earlier. My face throbbed, but the pain in my chest was heavier, deeper. It felt like something had settled there and refused to move. I replayed every word, every look, every moment of silence, especially the pauses where my son could have spoken and chose not to. I kept asking myself the same question. How did it come to this? For years I had told myself I was strong. I had survived loss. I had survived raising a child alone. I had survived financial strain, exhaustion, and nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how I would make it through the next day. And yet, being dismissed by my own family made all of that feel erased, as if none of it had ever counted. Shame crept in quietly. I wondered if they were right. I was too much. If my presence really did create problems. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied my face, swollen, red, unfamiliar. For a moment I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. Not because of the allergy, but because of how small I felt inside her. I thought about calling my son. I picked up my phone more than once. I imagined explaining how deeply his silence had hurt me, how exposed I had felt standing there. But each time I stopped. I already knew how that conversation would end. With excuses. with reassurances that changed nothing. With the quiet suggestion that I was being sensitive, that I was reading too much into it. So I stayed quiet. The loneliness was sharpest in the early hours of the morning. That was when it finally became clear to me that I hadn't been pushed aside all at once. I had been erased slowly, piece by piece. My opinions, my comfort, my place in their lives. And the hardest part was realizing how long I had allowed it to happen. They hadn't just asked me to leave the house that day. They had sent a message. That my presence was conditional. That my welcome depended on how easy I was to tolerate. That my worth could be questioned the moment I became inconvenient. By morning my eyes were dry. I had cried everything out during the night. What replaced the tears wasn't anger. It was clarity. I understood then that silence hadn't protected me. I had trained them. Trained them to believe I would always accept less. Trained them to believe I wouldn't push back. Trained them to believe they could treat me however they wanted without consequence. That realization hurt, but it also steadied me. For the first time I allowed myself to think about what I needed. Not what kept the peace. Not what made things easier for them. What would make me safe, respected, whole. I wasn't ready to act yet. I wasn't ready to confront anyone. But something shifted inside me that night. A quiet understanding that I couldn't keep surviving this way. I lay back on my bed as the sun began to rise, my face still tender, my heart still sore. And I made myself one promise. I would not disappear to make them comfortable ever again. The days that followed felt heavy and slow, as if time itself had thickened around me. My allergy faded the way it always did. The swelling eased, the redness retreated, my skin slowly returned to normal. But something inside me stayed inflamed. I moved through my routines out of habit, not purpose. Everything felt hollow, like actions without meaning. No one called to check on me. Not my son. Not my daughter-in-law. Not even a brief message asking if I was feeling better. That silence spoke louder than anything they had said. I spent hours sitting by the window watching the world move on without me. People walked their dogs. Children rode their bikes up and down the street. Couples passed by, talking, laughing, living. Normal life continued outside while I sat alone with my thoughts, turning everything over again and again. I kept asking myself where I had gone wrong. What moment had marked the beginning of my erasure? I felt embarrassed, not only by what had happened but by how deeply it hurt me. At my age, I thought I was past this kind of pain. I believed I had learned how to protect myself emotionally. But rejection from your own child finds a way past every defense you think you've built. Part of me wanted to excuse him, to tell myself he was under pressure, that he was trying to keep peace in his marriage, that he didn't mean to hurt me. I had spent years building those excuses for him, stacking them carefully so I wouldn't have to face what was right in front of me. The truth was harder. He saw what was happening. He heard the words. And he chose not to stop them. That knowledge settled inside me like a weight I couldn't shake. I felt trapped between two fears. One was the fear of losing my son completely if I spoke up. The other was the fear of losing myself if I stayed silent. For years I had chosen the first fear. That day showed me the cost of that choice. I began to see how powerless I had allowed myself to become. How often I had swallowed my feelings to avoid conflict. How many times I had told myself, this is just how things are now, as if that made it acceptable. But powerlessness is learned. And so is strength. One afternoon I pulled an old box from the back of my closet. Inside were papers I hadn't looked at in years. Documents, receipts, records. Things I had kept because I was careful. Because I had always believed in being prepared even when no one noticed. As I sat on the floor sorting through those papers one by one, I felt something unfamiliar rise in me. Not anger. Not revenge. Control. For the first time since that day my breathing slowed. I realized that while they thought they had pushed me aside, they had also underestimated me. They saw my age, my quiet nature, my patience, and mistook all of it for weakness. They were wrong. And in that moment I understood something that changed everything. I wasn't as powerless as they believed. Not even close. I didn't rush into anything. That was never my way. Over the years I had learned that patience when paired with clarity could be powerful. I spent days on my living room floor, papers spread out around me, working through everything one folder at a time. I let the facts speak louder than my emotions, even when the memories behind them stirred something deep in my chest. What my family didn't know, what they never thought to ask, was how carefully I had planned my life. After my husband passed, I made a quiet promise to myself that I would never be helpless again. I kept records of everything. Bank statements, property documents, agreements made years ago, during a time when my son was still finding his footing and I was steadying him from behind the scenes. The house they lived in wasn't as simple as they believed. It was tied to me in ways they never questioned because they assumed I would never challenge them. I had helped with the down payment. I had co-signed when it mattered. I had protected my son when he needed it most, never imagining that one day I might need to protect myself from him. I also had records of the support I had given them over the years. Childcare costs I quietly covered. Bills I paid without asking to be reimbursed. Emergencies I stepped in to handle when no one else could. I hadn't kept those records out of bitterness or resentment. I kept them because that was who I was: careful, organized, prepared. I believed in being responsible even when no one noticed. As I reviewed everything, something settled inside me. This wasn't about revenge fueled by anger. It wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. About correcting a situation that had tipped too far against me because I had allowed it to. I realized they had built their confidence on a single assumption: that I would never act. That I would always choose peace over fairness. That my love as a mother meant endless tolerance no matter the cost to myself. They were wrong about that too. Quietly I made a list. Not of grievances but of truths. What was legally mine? What was documented? What could be proven? I didn't imagine dramatic confrontations or raised voices. I imagined something far calmer and far more effective: justice. I also thought carefully about what I wanted the outcome to be. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I didn't want to humiliate them the way I had been humiliated. What I wanted was my dignity back. I wanted safety, independence, the ability to live without wondering if my presence could be questioned or withdrawn at someone else's convenience. For the first time in a long while I felt grounded. The fear that had lived in my chest for years began to loosen its grip. I understood then that my strength didn't come from confrontation. It came from knowing the truth and being willing to stand by it. That was my quiet planning phase. No calls. No messages. No warnings. Just preparation. And once I was ready, I knew exactly what my next step would be. The decision didn't arrive in a rush of emotion. It came quietly, in a moment of calm certainty. I was sitting at my kitchen table, papers neatly stacked in front of me, a cup of tea growing cold beside my hand. I looked around my home, the place where I had rebuilt myself after loss, where I had learned how to survive on my own, and I knew without hesitation that I was done waiting for permission to exist. I decided to stop begging for love. That was the turning point. Not anger. Not revenge fantasies. Just a clear line drawn inside me. I understood that if I didn't act now, nothing would ever change. They would continue believing they could push me aside whenever it suited them. And I would keep shrinking to fit into a space that was never meant to hold me. The first thing I did was make a call I had avoided for years. I contacted a lawyer. Not dramatically. Not with accusations or tears. I simply asked for clarity. I explained my situation calmly, the way I always had, and laid out the facts as I understood them. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't plead. I spoke the truth. That conversation grounded me. For the first time in a long while, someone listened without interrupting me. Without minimizing what I was saying. Without suggesting I was being too sensitive or emotional. I was asked questions. Real questions. About documents, about contributions, about agreements that had been made over the years. And with every answer I gave, I felt steadier, more sure of myself. I wasn't imagining my leverage. I wasn't overreacting. I had rights. That realization changed the way I carried myself. I stopped checking my phone, waiting for a message that never came. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, wondering what I should have said differently. I stopped hoping my son would suddenly understand. Instead, I shifted my focus inward toward protecting what little peace I still had. I began organizing everything properly. I labeled folders. I made copies. I wrote timelines. I prepared myself not for a fight but for a conversation. One rooted in facts, not emotions. I knew that when the time came, my calm would be my greatest strength. Most importantly, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer accept humiliation in exchange for belonging. That promise brought clarity. And clarity brought confidence. I wasn't ready to confront them yet. But I was ready to stop being invisible. And once that decision settled in me, there was no going back. The confrontation didn't unfold the way they might have expected. There was no yelling. No accusations hurled across the room. I didn't arrive angry or emotional. I arrived prepared. A few weeks after that day, my son called me. His voice was casual, almost polite, as if nothing had happened at all. He said they were having a small family gathering and asked if I wanted to come. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of what had been said or done. Just an invitation that felt less like kindness and more like a test. I said yes. When I walked into their living room, the same room I had been asked to leave, I felt steady in a way that surprised even me. My face was clear that day. Calm. I noticed the brief flicker of relief in my daughter-in-law's eyes when she realized there was nothing visible for her to criticize. She offered a tight smile, already assuming she had regained control. We sat down. The children played nearby, their laughter filling the space. Small talk floated around us, polite and shallow. I listened more than I spoke. I wasn't there to fill silence. I was there to speak when it mattered. When the conversation paused, I reached for my folder and placed it on the table. Not forcefully. Not to intimidate. Just deliberately. I need to talk, I said. They both looked at me then. My son leaned back in his chair, unease settling into his posture. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms, her expression guarded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't revisit every insult or replay every painful moment. I spoke about facts. I explained my contributions calmly and clearly. I explained the legal connections they had never questioned because they never thought they needed to. I laid out timelines, documents, and records one by one, my voice steady, my hands still. I told them how I had been asked to leave their home. I told them what it felt like to be treated as a problem instead of a person. I told my son plainly what his silence had cost me. The room changed. My daughter-in-law tried to interrupt, but I didn't stop. For once, I didn't adjust my words to protect her comfort. I finished what I had come to say. When I slid the final document across the table, the confidence drained from their faces, replaced by something closer to understanding. This wasn't about blame anymore. It was about reality. For the first time, they realized I wasn't asking to be heard. I was informing them. The days after that conversation were quiet, but the silence felt different this time. It wasn't the kind that erased me or pushed me into the background. It was the kind that made them uncomfortable. My son called me 2 days later. His voice wasn't casual anymore. It was careful, measured. He asked questions he had never asked before. About documents, about timelines, about what I wanted. For the first time in a long while, uncertainty crept into his voice and I could hear it clearly. I answered calmly. I didn't threaten. I didn't argue. I simply repeated the facts. I reminded him that everything I had shown them was real, documented, and legally valid. I told him I wasn't interested in punishing anyone. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was interested in fairness. That word seemed to land hard. My daughter-in-law didn't call. Instead, the silence around her was filled by others. Family friends. Distant relatives. People who had always known me as quiet, dependable, harmless. Suddenly they were hearing a different story. Not rumors. Not exaggerations. The truth. And the truth moved faster than excuses ever could. The power dynamic shifted quickly after that. Decisions that had once been made without me now required my input. Conversations changed in tone, becoming careful instead of dismissive. The confidence my daughter-in-law had worn so easily began to crack. She was no longer speaking about me behind closed doors. She was being forced to speak to me directly and respectfully. There were legal consequences too. Not dramatic courtroom scenes or public spectacles, but real, serious adjustments. Agreements were revisited. Responsibilities were clarified. Long-standing assumptions were corrected. The safety net they had taken for granted was no longer automatic or invisible. What surprised me most was how calm I felt through all of it. For years, I had imagined that standing up for myself would feel terrifying. That it would cost me everything. That it would leave me alone. Instead, it gave me something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Control. My son began to understand the cost of his silence. Not because I lectured him or demanded apologies, but because he was living with the consequences. He had allowed someone to disrespect me, and now he was seeing how much I had been holding together without recognition. I didn't celebrate their discomfort. I didn't take satisfaction in watching them struggle. I simply observed it. For the first time, the balance was no longer tilted against me. It was finally even. The resolution didn't arrive all at once. It settled slowly the way real change always does. There was no dramatic apology, no emotional breakdown where everyone suddenly understood my pain. What happened instead was quieter and far more honest. I secured my independence first. That mattered more to me than anything else. I made sure my living situation was protected, stable, and entirely under my control. No conditions. No favors. No expectations attached. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like my place in the world could be questioned or taken away without warning. A few weeks later, my son came to see me. Alone. He looked older somehow. Tired in a way I recognized immediately. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table. The same table where I had once spread out papers and realized I still had power. For a while, neither of us spoke. When he finally did, his voice was low, stripped of defensiveness. "I should have defended you," he said. "It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I deserved. But it was real." I told him I wasn't asking to be chosen over his wife. I was asking for basic respect. I told him that silence, especially in moments of cruelty, becomes a choice, and that choice leaves marks that don't always fade. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. He listened. Truly listened. And for me, that was enough to close that chapter without bitterness. My daughter-in-law kept her distance after that. She was polite now. Careful with her words. The sharp edge she once carried was gone, not because her heart had changed, but because she understood something she hadn't before. I was not powerless. And I was not disposable. I didn't need revenge anymore. What I needed was dignity. And I had it. Looking back now, I see how easily age is mistaken for weakness. How patience is mistaken for submission. How quiet women are underestimated every single day. I believed those things about myself once. I won't make that mistake again. I am 69 years old. I survived loss, sacrifice, and betrayal. And I reclaimed my life without shouting, without begging, and without breaking. This is what strength looks like at my age. And this is how I won. Now, when I look back on everything that happened, I don't feel bitterness. What I feel is awareness, a clarity I didn't have before. For a long time, I believed that being a good mother meant staying quiet, enduring discomfort, accepting disrespect if it meant keeping the family together. I told myself that age required sacrifice, that love meant lowering my voice and my needs. I believed that wanting less from myself was a sign of maturity. I was wrong. What I learned is simple, but it took me 69 years to truly understand it. Respect is not something you age out of. And dignity is not something you should ever have to earn from your own family. I didn't lose my family the day they asked me to leave. I lost an illusion. The illusion that patience alone would protect me. The illusion that silence would keep me safe. The illusion that love excuses cruelty. Standing up for myself didn't make me harsh or unkind. It made me honest. I also learned that strength doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, in paperwork spread across a table, in calm conversations, in the firm decision to never accept humiliation again. Strength can look like restraint, like clarity, like choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. I don't hate my son. I don't wish harm on his wife. I simply refuse to disappear to make them comfortable. That single boundary changed everything. Today my life is peaceful. I wake up in my own space. I manage my health without shame. I speak when something feels wrong. And when I choose silence now, it isn't fear, it's confidence. If you're listening to this and you feel invisible in your own family, especially as you grow older, hear this clearly. Your age does not make you weak. Your patience does not make you powerless. And your kindness should never be used against you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I didn't break. I simply remembered who I was. And that was enough to reclaim my life. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe, and never forget your worth.